Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another session. We are talking about automating the employee onboarding process using M365 and the Power Platform with Becky Bertram. Becky, thank you for being here. Pleasure to have you here, and it's all yours.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So my name is Becky Bertram, and welcome to the Canadian Cloud Summit. I don't know how many of you have attended all day or part of the day, but I'm really glad to be a part of this event that's taking place. Even though I am based in St. Louis, Missouri, a little bit further south, I have to say that I have been to, I used to live in Michigan, so I've been to Toronto and Ontario a number of times. I've gone hiking in the mountains in Banff, and I've been to British Columbia, Vancouver Island. So I have enjoyed the great country of Canada, and I'm, even though I'm sad that I can't be there in person right now, I appreciate you allowing me to take part in this event. As always, we want to thank the sponsors who have allowed events like this to take place. So when they reach out to you, make sure that you take some time to listen to maybe what they're trying to provide for you, because we can't have events like this without sponsors. Being down in St. Louis, we hold our own events around our neck of the woods, and so we appreciate any companies that are willing to sponsor this kind of event. I'm going to say this at the beginning so that we don't run out of time at the end, but there is a survey that you can take for each of the sessions that you submit. You can win a chance to you can submit it for a chance to win a gift card for $50 for Amazon. So there is a URL for it or a QR code. And for this session in particular, this is the code. So if you want to fill out the survey, the code for my session is 300681. I really do appreciate your feedback on it, just because as a speaker, I always appreciate knowing how my sessions are received and how I can improve on it. All right, with that, I'm just going to give a brief overview of myself. As I mentioned, I'm based in the St. Louis area. I'm actually in Illinois. I'm on the other side of the Mississippi River. But my company is called Savvy Technical Solutions, and I've been an MVP for a very long time for Office apps and services and SharePoint before that, and a Microsoft certified trainer. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to connect with me on Twitter if you are using social media, or you can always go to my website, which is savvytechnicalsolutions.com, and you can fill out a contact form, and I'm happy to reach out to you there as well. So I'm always happy to connect with people in the community, so please, I really mean it, don't be a stranger. If you have any questions about anything you've seen or just want to bounce around ideas, I'm always happy to talk with people. And so, yeah, with that, let's get going on the presentation. The purpose of this presentation today is really just to give you an example of how you can use the building blocks of Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform together. This is not really meant to be a blueprint of this is how you should do it in your environment per se. This is really just giving you an idea of how can we use all these different applications and workloads within Microsoft 365 and use them all together to create a unified solution. So when you're listening to this, I really hope that this can be fairly interactive in nature, in the sense that this onboarding process that I'm going to be going through is something that is not unique. I think probably all of you that are on this call have some sort of onboarding process that happens from a technical side. There's the HR side of it and the technology side of it that goes on. And I understand that there are a lot of HR tools out there, whether using Workforce or they're different platforms, right, for keeping track of human resources information. This is a little bit more specific than that, but I would love, hopefully if we have enough time at the end of this session, to be able to talk about how you guys are doing it and how you can either implement parts of this in your own system, or maybe what you've done to overcome some of these obstacles. So this is really meant to just be an example of a scenario, just so you can start to see sort of an end-to-end scenario rather than a deep dive into one particular workload, I should say. So first, let's talk about the scenario that we're going to be addressing today. I want to tell you that this actually is a solution that I implemented at a customer that I was working at. I have recreated it in my dev environment because clearly, since we're dealing with HR information, I'm not going to show you a live solution for this. But I want you to know that everything I'm talking through today is actually doable, and I actually have implemented this in a production environment. So when we talk about employee onboarding here, the scenario that we're walking through is the idea that there's a company, and at this company, recruiters are trying to seek out active candidates. So an active candidate, when you're trying to recruit somebody, it's before they've even given a verbal offer. You need to get their resume, you need to submit a background check, you need to do some screening processes before they decide to come on board. Once they become an employee, we need to do certain things on the back end, such as set up a user account in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, provision Microsoft 365 license. We want to make sure that people are added to the proper teams and groups. And we need to let the IT department know that the new user has been created, because they may have a further checklist that they want to go through, such as make sure that the monitors are set up, or that the parking transponder has been issued, and their their security key or whatever, right? And then finally, various stakeholders need to be notified. And this could be everything from the person's manager to someone in finance who needs to enter them in, so they can get their pay stubs and everything like that. So the idea is sort of starting with the person as a candidate, walking all the way through, making sure that from a technical standpoint, their user account is provisioned. And finally, at the end, being able to notify the proper people that, hey, someone new has come aboard. So in this solution I'm going to be walking through, we're going to be touching a whole lot of different workloads, including SharePoint, Planner, Power Apps and Power Automate, Azure AD, Exchange, Teams, Yammer, Word Online, and Microsoft Search. So again, I'm going to try and give a rough overview of how we can incorporate all these different apps and workloads in this unified solution. And just really a warning here. Warning is sort of a strong word, only so far as saying that, like you mentioned before, this is sort of a lightweight recreation of what I built. So the purpose of this is not to tell you how to do error handling or how to do the proper use of Power Automate or Power Apps. Rest assured, in a sort of production environment, I would have dotted all my I's and crossed my T's. But this is really a purpose just to give you sort of a rough draft of the kind of solution you can build. So please don't get too nitpicky on me, is all I'm going to ask. So first, let's talk about the background in terms of the technologies and the platform. One of the requirements is the fact that there are typically multiple systems in use. For example, HR probably does have its own system of record. At my client, they have a system for handling things like, your performance reviews, and people have different ways of storing things like org charts and things like that. And of course, you do have tax records, payroll systems, all that kind of stuff. So the idea here is that SharePoint is not typically that original source, the original record, right? But in this case, we're going to be using a SharePoint list as a record, because that is going to be what's used to trigger all our other processes. So in this case, we don't assume that this SharePoint record is the record, but we are going to utilize it for our purposes. The next thing to note is that we're using Azure AD for identity management. At the client I was working at, they actually still had on-premises Active Directory, and so we set up a system of PowerShell remoting, and then we upgraded it to use Azure Automation to be able to create those Active Directory accounts on-prem and then have them synchronize up to Azure Active Directory. But for the sake of this example, we're just going to be provisioning it in Azure AD. And in this scenario too, let's say that each department has its own team. So you have a team for, finance, for IT, for marketing, etc. So when someone says, oh, this person works in the IT department, on the back end, we want our Power Automate flow to not only provision that user account, but we want to be able to add it to the proper Azure, the Office 365 group, or now it's Microsoft 365 group. Now, when we talk about the business requirements, the business, in our case, was using a different tool already for tracking. It was just a checklist tool. And I said, hey, we can use Planner for that. So in this scenario, we're going to be using Planner, and that each person will get a new bucket. And so each employee will, a candidate that's getting onboarded will have a bucket with a task associated with them that the recruiter or the HR manager has to walk through as they walk through that hiring process. Another requirement is the fact that a lot of times when you're onboarding people, you're collecting what I would say is sort of disposable information. For example, if you're, maybe you want to give them like a new t-shirt when they get onboarded, or a new polo shirt or a jacket or something like that. You might want to know like their t-shirt size. Well, that doesn't really need to be kept with any sort of permanent record. It's really just for use for initially when we're getting them hired, right? Another example is how many monitors they need. Well, once the monitors have been assigned, chances are the IT department's going to keep track of that in sort of asset tracking, maybe again, a different system of record. But when we're first getting started, we need to say, hey, this person wants 1 monitor, 2 monitors, etc. So the idea is that sometimes there really is information that is only required when you're first setting them up, and then once it's been set up, and maybe it's tracked somewhere else, or maybe it doesn't need to be tracked. So we wanted to be able to actually create 2 different records, one that's sort of the initial information, and the second that's the more permanent level of information. And again, as we talked about for the new hire notifications, we want to be able to tell people that a new hire has come on board. Another requirement that we did at the organization I worked at is they actually had a list of telephone numbers. You need to be able to create that telephone number before the Active Directory account is created, so that you can add that telephone number to their Active Directory profile, because then actually they were doing things like auto creating signatures based with their profile in Active Directory with that phone number, right? It was all connected. So in this scenario, what we actually did is we created an Excel spreadsheet with available telephone numbers. So the workflow would actually go through the spreadsheet and find the first unused telephone number, and then update the Excel spreadsheet with this user, and then it would take that phone number and assign it to the record in SharePoint. So that was another business requirement, is being able to notify people of a new hire and to be able to assign a telephone number. So let's walk through this whole process of kind of this first step of the process, I should say, of how this is going through. So what we do first is we created a new hire list in SharePoint, and this is sort of this temporary place of tracking candidates. And remember, a candidate could say no, right? So we don't want to add them to employee lists because they may not even make it that far in the process, right? After that, when a new item is added to the list, what's going to happen is we actually have another SharePoint list that has a list of the sort of default tasks that are going to get created for that user in their bucket and planner. So it's going to go to the SharePoint list, figure out what task needs to create, add the employee, the candidate, as a new bucket, and then assign those tasks to it. Now, we don't want users to necessarily go right to that new hire list. We're going to create a Power App, and that's how they're going to view and edit information or add it to our underlying SharePoint list, which is that data source. And then finally, within Teams, this is how users are going to get to the Power App, and they're going to get to that plan. So let's take a look at what this looks like in person. So here we go. I've created a team for HR, and I created a channel specifically for employee management here. So here we've got the new hire list. And so again, this is this information that's keeping track of things like what's their t-shirt size, and if they've been entered into the HR system, is there sort of a unique ID or information to get on the other system? So the idea here is, as we're starting to create new information, the recruiter needs to know, oh, have I created a record in them in this other system? So again, keeping in mind, it's not like this has to be the primary record, but as the candidate is onboarding a candidate, they really want to know this information that where that other permanent record is. So like t-shirt size, we probably don't need to know after this. Has the security badge been issued? Yes or no? Once it has been issued, probably building management or someone's keeping track of it, right? So that doesn't need to be part of the employee record per se. It's kept in a different system of record, but this is our data source that we're working with. So it's a SharePoint list here of each of these users that were created. Now, if you notice for each of these users, there's that bucket ID. That masks to our actual plan here. So within the plan, each user has a bucket with different tasks that have been associated to it. So this is the planner tasks template list. So this is a SharePoint list that says, all right, the first thing that needs to happen is the candidate needs to upload their resume. We can choose to add a description to that task. We can actually specify who the task will be assigned to by default. If there's an attachment URL, we can specify it, and then we have the order in which the task should be created. So what's going to happen is when that workflow happens, it's going to go through and it's going to create each of these tasks. So if we look at here, we're saying, you know what, you need to upload the resume to the candidate information folder in the HR site, right? So if that happens and we go to the plan, you can see here that the link is to that location within the team here, within that document library. So by having all this information in the SharePoint list, we're actually specifying what these planner tasks are being defined with. You know, if you're sending an offer, make sure you use DocuSign, etc. However you want to set that up. And you can see in some cases we're not assigning a user to DocuSign, but in other cases we're actually saying this is the person who needs to be assigned to it. So when a user, so in general, we wouldn't be surfacing this new hire list or the planner task. I just wanted you to see it. But in general, all the users are going to see is the Power App and that plan there. So in this case, you can see here for John Doe, we've got the list of the task. And if I click on View Task, it's actually giving me a list of what's outstanding and what's been completed. Now, I'm not trying to replace planner. They still need to use the plan, but at least it gives you sort of a snapshot of like how far along in the process are we for this particular user. And of course, you can go in and you can edit the various pieces of information for the user. So if I go in here and I'm going to create a new user, I'll go ahead and add myself. Why not? 1214. Oh, I was born yesterday. A woman never tells her age. All right, and then the t-shirt size. All right. Now I'm going to specify that department, and remember that's going to have impact on which group my user gets created in, right? We have things like a start date, HR system ID. I'll just add something in here. Yes, we issued a security badge, and I'm actually going to put an office location in here. So when I save this record, if we go back to our new hire list, we can actually see that the new record was created there in the underlying list. And in fact, the Power Automate flow should be executing. So if we go to our flows here, you can see here that we've got new hire item created. And if I click on that, I should actually see, okay, that happened 1 day ago. We may have to wait a minute for that to take place. It's going to take a minute for that flow to run. If we walk through the flow, what we're doing is we're saying when an item is created, go ahead and create a new bucket with their first name and last name. And remember, a bucket is one of those columns in Planner. And then after we've created the bucket, we're going back to the item in the new hire list and saying, hey, this is your bucket ID. That's important because that's how we can show planner tasks have been completed or not completed within the Power App. It can go query that bucket. After that, it's going to go to my planner task list. An important thing, this is minor, but when planner tasks are created, they're actually going to get created at the top. So every time you create a new task, it adds it to the top of the list. So if you have them in order of, like, you know, if we go through and we say first you need to upload resume, well, by default, if you just add them in the order you intend, your list of tasks will start at the bottom and go to the top. So actually, when we go to our to the flow, we need to make sure that we reverse the order. And that's why we have that order number within that list to be able to sort it that way. So what we're doing through is we're saying, all right, for each item, we're going to go through and we're going to use the create task action. And once that task is created, then we're going to go through, say, hey, did the SharePoint list have an attachment? If so, let's update the planner task with the attachment value. Hey, was there a description for it? We're going to add that description to the planner task. One of the reasons we have to do that is when you have create task, it actually doesn't give you all those different fields. It's actually pretty minimal. It's the which plan, which group are we adding it to, which bucket, who's it assigned to, start date, end date, and then for whatever reason, we have values for every single possible label. I don't know why that isn't passed in as an array or something, but there you go. So anyhow, if you want those extra fields, we're having to do the update. But this is essentially the flow that is executing here. So let's see if it has had a chance to run yet. There it is. Hey, it's 2 minutes ago. All right, so if we run through here, we can actually see it did update the item with a new bucket ID. And then if we go through, we will see that then it created each of those tasks for 4 different tasks. So let's go back to our plan, and hey, there it is. The new bucket got created for my new for me, and we can see that was added because that executed. Are there any questions about that so far? You guys are in rapt attention, I can tell. No? Okay. All right, well then I will continue with our next steps in this process. All right, so once that employee has been hired.
Hey, Becky.
Oh yeah.
There is a question actually.
Okay.
Can you read it, or do you want me to read it for you?
Oh, I can read it. It's okay. Okay, in the context of there are several people in the onboarding process. In the setup she did for her client, who the role is the person filling in the list, the page with the t-shirt size, setting up those photos. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. In this context, essentially there's a recruiter. And so it's the HR manager. There are people in the HR department. So this is not for a user. This is not for the candidate to say, this is my t-shirt size. No, they have other ways of collecting that information. This is, again, if we look at the type of tasks that are happening, if we go into it, I have so many windows open, apologies. I have to find which one. Here it is. Nope, that's not it. I didn't close it down. There it is. Okay. So if we go and we look at those different tasks, those are more things like, have I sent out the offer letter? So we're going to send it out with DocuSign. Did they get a background check? Did you remember to tell the candidate of their background check? Have you added them to the HR system? So in this case, the person filling this out, that's why it's an HR team. This would be like an HR manager. But that being said, part of the onboarding process we're going to get to next is once they become an employee, that's usually where the IT department steps in. So a lot of people just have a manual process, right? You submit a help desk ticket and you say, hey, can someone please create an account for this user? So the intent behind this whole process is to cut out the manual step of someone having to manually log in to Azure Active Directory, create a user, add them to the teams. and the purpose is to automate the whole thing. So those tasks are usually done by the IT manager. But what's part of this process, this is not anywhere where the employee themselves are entering information. That could definitely be added because this list is in here. There's no reason why you couldn't like create a Microsoft form and have a Power Automate workflow that says when you fill out the form, find the record and update it here. You could, that would be a very creative way to be able to further augment the process, but that's not part in the scenario that I built out per se. Does that answer the question, Bernice? I'm not sure if that does. Did that answer it for you? Okay, I don't know. Yes. Okay, thank you. You're applauding. Thank you. I see that. All right, very good. Great question. Yeah, that's important to understand the scenario for sure. All right, so in this scenario, as we're moving on, let's say that, okay, we've now said, all right, the person accepted the offer. So what's going to happen is we're going to actually copy someone in the Power app, someone in the HR department is going to say, it's official. They got hired. We need to create an account. We need to notify everybody. We're off to the races, right? So what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to create a duplicate record. And whereas in general, I'm not a fan of duplicating content, the intent behind this is eventually when you've completely onboarded them, I actually intend for the HR staff to delete the records out of the new hire list, to delete the bucket out of the plan. It truly is temporary. So this is how we're moving it from that temporary store into the permanent store. But there will be a duplication of content briefly. So what's going to happen is once we add it to the employee list, we're going to have the user's going to click a button and say, create an employee. It will copy the information into the employee list, at which time a trigger will fire, which says it will do all these additional tasks. Number one, it's going to create a new user in Azure Active Directory. It will determine which department they're in and add them to the appropriate group. The next thing we're going to do is actually generate a word checklist. So at my client, I proposed to them creating a planner plan for their IT department as well. And they said, oh, heavens no, when we're going through our checklist, it's not like we're going to wait 3 days and then take a week to do the next thing. It's like, did you give them their monitors? Did you set up their phone? Are they set up in Teams? There's things that all happen very fast all at once. We just want to make sure that people don't like forget a step, right? So in this case, it's really more like very quick and dirty. Did I do it? And they just want a quick checklist. They said, we don't want to keep track of planner and all that stuff. So what I actually did is we used a Word template. Now it is a premium connector, and you'll see that in the flow, it has that little diamond for the premium connector, but you can use that premium connection to populate a Word document with information from SharePoint. So what we're going to do is take the name of the employee, stick it at the top of the Word document, create a new Word document with the name of the employee, and it'll have that checklist there. And that's actually getting created in the IT team channel, the team site in the employee management channel, so that's where they're keeping track of their processes. Of course, we're going to send an email to notify people, say, hey, this person's coming on board. And the last step is, again, maybe not everybody's doing it, but I just wanted to give an example of it, of creating having a Yammer group. So at this client I'm working with, even though they aren't using Yammer widely, they were rebuilding their intranet site, and typically communication site are meant for more of that outward communication, but you can't really like give feedback. And so they wanted to be able to have a way of saying somebody got on board, like if somebody had a life event, a work anniversary, or they had a baby or got married or something like that, they wanted a way where people could, post their own pictures or say congratulations and things like that. So if we use this sort of scenario, we can actually post an announcement that says, everybody, please welcome Becky Bertram to the company. So the idea here is that people can say, welcome, so glad to have you here, etc. So we're going to auto announce the new person within that Yammer group. The last piece of the puzzle is not really, it's not tied specifically to the employee list, but it is tied to their account being created in Active Directory. The whole floor plan concept is probably less relevant than it used to be in the now that we're in the days of hybrid work. Floor plans, this is a concept rolled out in Office 365 several years ago. And now that so many people are working from home, this probably is less relevant than it used to be, but I still think it's pretty cool. If you can populate an office location in Active Directory, you can actually upload a CAD file with your offices and their locations specified in the CAD file. And then when a user searches for an employee or someone, they do a person search, if they find that office location, they'll actually show the person's actual location on a map of how to get to them. So this is especially helpful if you have like new employees that are trying to find someone, or if you have a huge campus where people are located all over the place in multiple buildings. So I'm just going to give a brief example of how you can even tie this into the whole process. Great, so let's take a look at how this could look. Whoops. Our demo here. So we're in our Power App. We went ahead and we created Becky Bertram. Again, we can view the tasks. We haven't completed any tasks for this person yet, but let's say that we go in here and we say, all right, she uploaded her resume, we have the resume, accepted the verbal offer, we sent it, we got the t-shirt size, etc. All right, we're good to go. So now we're going to go in and if I refresh my data source, let's see if those tasks, yep, those are all completed. We are ready to create the employee record. So voila, Becky has accepted, and we have gathered all the necessary information. We've created it. Again, rest assured, in the production app, I have a lot more feedback, and I actually compare the employee record to this record, so that if they've already created the employee record, I actually am sort of showing, hey, this value is different. You need to and you can basically re-export the record if anything's different. So let's go to our employees list. So again, this is that primary source here. And we can see here we have a record for Becky Bertram. And in this case, I don't have the t-shirt size and did they get a transponder and all that kind of stuff. I do have that office location in there, and I have the department. But if you can notice here, that user account record, if we look at like Mickey Mouse here, that user account is actually a people field. All right, so right now, no Active Directory account has been created yet for that user. And it's sort of a two-step process. The user account has to be created in Azure Active Directory, but there's actually a little bit of a lag in time before the Active Directory account is available in SharePoint. So what I did in my flow is I actually created a timer job that runs like once an hour. And it's kind of like a fall through methodology. The first time it runs, it says, do they have a telephone number? Nope. Okay, go create the telephone number, because we can't create an Active Directory account till that telephone number's been created. So it goes through and creates a telephone number. The next time it goes through and says, okay, grab all the user accounts with no telephone number and no user account. So then, or it says, sorry, the first time is with a no telephone number. And then it goes through and says, grab all the items that have a telephone number but no user account. Okay, go ahead and create a user account. Because again, we don't want to create the Active Directory account so we know what their telephone number is to add to the record, right? So then it goes through and adds the Active Directory account. But if it were to immediately right after that, try and add it to SharePoint, it would say that account is not, it doesn't exist yet. So we have to sort of run it a third time. So because these processes have a little bit of latency by having a timer job, it just sort of says whichever users are in whatever stage of the process, execute. So my query is basically saying grab all the users where there's no user account. So even though this employee list could be quite large, it's only going to say, okay, the user records that have no user account, those are the ones we're going to go through and try and to create something for. So let's go to our Power Automate. And now if we go to employee created or modified, So you can see that that executed 2 minutes ago. So this is where it actually went through, and it says, has the Active Directory account been created? No, it hasn't been created yet. And the way you know that in Power Automate is you say get user. And if it throws an error, well, that user doesn't exist. So it went ahead and it did create the user. And then we actually, pardon me, we went down and we said, okay, if the department is IT, what we're going to do is we're actually going to add it to the IT group here. But if you notice here, we tried to update the record in SharePoint with a new user account, and it says, can't do it. The specified user doesn't exist. So we actually did create that user account, but when you do it right away, you can see that that error gets thrown. But so yeah, let's go through and we'll look at here. And so in the list here, if I look at the employees list, there's still no user account in this record. It's still not there because it tried to update it and it says that account doesn't exist yet. But if I go to my Active Directory and I look at my list of users here, there's the account that just got created. All right. So yeah, this is the me that's the developer, but that's the account that literally just got created a minute ago. And if I go look at this and I say, what are the groups that this Becky Bertram is a member of, you can see that it did actually add it to that IT group. And if I go to back to Teams, so many windows open. All right, if I go to my IT team and I say manage team and I look at the members, I could actually see that this is the new account that just got created. That's the Becky. I shouldn't have used my own name. That's confusing, but you can see here that that was actually created at that location there. So that's pretty, that whole process went through and added that user. So the next thing I want to point out is that in the IT department here, this is where we have sort of the checklist template. So if I look at the checklist template, I use those developer controls to be able to create, say, this is that, this is a field that's the employee name field. So this is the template that gets created. You can see that a new document got created called test. Oh, that was the one that test user. That's not the one I want. Let's see if that ran. I don't know why my Becky Bertram one didn't run. I think the flow, again, we might just have to wait a minute for that flow to run. So my apologies. Again, there's, you know, a little bit of latency here for having these Power Automate flows run. So if we go here back to the flows, we can see that when that employee is created or modified, we ran it the first time. Okay, and then, but remember it couldn't update it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm actually going to resubmit the run. Well, what's going to happen is, again, let's just imagine this is like my timer job. This is the second time it ran. What's going to go through there and it's going to say, has the user been created yet? Well, it does get user and it says, yep, I found the user. So we know that the user's been created. So this time it's going to go ahead and it's going to try and update the record within SharePoint to be able to. So now if we go back to SharePoint, we can see that that record has been created. Oh, here's the last one. I think I have to, I might have to manually run it. Oh, I remember. So I have a manual trigger for this. It doesn't, normally it would be fired automatically, but I just have a manual trigger. So I'll show how that works. We can walk through that. So if we go back to our team here, to that user. So for this user here, we can't really fire flows from the team. So we're going to go in here as I actually, in this case, typically it would be automated, but I wanted you guys to see an example of the fact that it is possible to have these run as a manual trigger as well. So this is just an example of having a variety of inputs. Typically when I'm building code like this, especially things like notifications, we can have the automated notification goes out, but sometimes people are like, you know what, so-and-so said they didn't get the email, or it notifies the day they come on board, but I want people to know 3 days ahead of time or something like that. So I typically have two if you can use sort of child flows within your Power Automate. I have sort of two parent flows, one with a manual trigger, one with an automated trigger, and they both sort of dump into a single flow that has all that logic. So anyhow, we're going to go ahead and say notify the new employee. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to manually fire. I'm going to run the flow. And that is what's going to fire my flow. So now when I go in here and I go create it, now we can see that Becky Bertram got created there. So the flow went and it's populated my name there at the top for that. So let's go back to Power Automate. Again, if I refresh this, I should be able to see what just happened. It went through and we said for that selected item, get the item in SharePoint. And again, what this template is doing, if we look at the flow itself, when you populate a Word template, it goes through and it actually detects all those fields you enter. So I'm populating that employee name field in the Word template with the first and last name. So you can go ahead and say this is their email, this is their telephone number, etc. And then finally, I'm sending an email that says, hey, Becky Bertram will be starting at this time. So if I go in here and I try and get a new email, I should see that email notification. Hey, Becky Bertram will be starting on this date. And when we go down here, the last piece of this is that if I go to my corporate intranet and we go over here, we can now see we have a note in the EMR that says, please welcome Becky Bertram. All right. The last piece of the process I want to talk about is that search component. I'm going to close this all down. So when you go into the Microsoft Admin Center here, it's actually, if we look at all the admin centers that are available, search is usually hidden. But if you go into the Search Admin Center and then you go into Answers, it's sort of, to me, not completely intuitive, but that's where it belongs. And you can actually upload a floor plan. Now, the good news is, like I went to my client and I said, hey, do you have the CAD drawings? And they're like, no, an interior designer built our cubicles, not like a construction company. So we don't have a CAD file, but we do have a Visio diagram. Well, unbeknownst to me, because I'm not a interior designer or a construction employee, you can export Visio diagrams, floor plans as a CAD file. So who knew? Isn't that awesome? So even if you just have a Visio diagram, you can actually export it. So in my case, I actually, the first step you have to do is you have to have a location. So this is where you're actually saying building 1, building 2, headquarters, whatever. So as sort of a joke, I said, hey, we're at, Pennsylvania Avenue. So, I work at the White House. There you go. But once you have various building locations, each building is going to have an ID. So in my case, my headquarters, I'm just calling building 1. All right. So I have one floor plan. In this case, I've only filled out with a couple people. So you can upload your file, that DWG for a drawing file. And for this floor plan, I'm saying, all right, this is for floor 17. So then you would go through and you would say, okay, we couldn't find any users. So if we look here, it's saying, okay, these are all the floor locations we found in the document. Well, the deal is in Azure Active Directory, we're going to go next, and you're actually going to see, first it's saying the building code. So remember I said, my headquarters, I only have one building, but you could have building 13 or whatever. Once you go through there, it's going to say, oh, once we add the building code here to the front of it, now it makes sense. Because in Azure Active Directory, when we created an office code, we actually used this nomenclature, which is the name of the building / and in our case, we're saying the floor number and then the office number. So this is building 1, floor 17, cubicle 101. So there are different ways. If you look at the help documentation, it's able to, if your floor plans have various patterns, it will detect them. There are a couple sort of legit floor plans. So if you continue mapping, you can go through, and this is again where you would say, okay, it'll say, here's a sample number I found. And you could say, oh, well, that's floor 17 and that's room 124. So this is again where you're sort of spelling out this is how I'm mapping my floor plan to the actual users. So if I go here, this is an example of my actual floor plan, and I literally just went to Visio and I uploaded the actual sample floor plan, and that's what I used. So if we zoom into this, we can actually see the different room numbers. So that's a conference room, but this is room 17119, 17120, etc. So if we go up there, we can see the different rooms. So if I go in here and I start searching for the IT manager, this is what's cool. If I go and look at that, let's try a different one. I hope by remapping everything. Oh, I think I unmapped everything, drat. This is, I will say, the most finicky part of my demo, because if you, it frequently undoes itself. I will say that. People, there it is. Okay, finally. All right, this is an example. So my account is, when you pull up the people card in the search, you can see here that it said the office, it has this office tab, and this is where you can actually use the Visio diagram, maps your office location and shows it there. So this is again one of those things that depends on how big your office is and how important this is. And again, with remote work, and after I explained this to my client, they said, well, that's fine, but we have different software where people can rent a cube kind of thing. So but after they said that, they discovered, no, there are a lot of people that are working all the time and they still want an office. So I haven't tried this with like conference rooms. I don't see why this wouldn't work with a conference room too, that people can search for a conference room. I just haven't gotten that working. Anyhow, this is just an example of how that could work. So that being said, that is it for my demo. Again, feel free to fill out the questionnaire about how the survey, I guess, and just want to refresh your memory again with my code. That's 300-681 if you want to fill that in. Again, our sponsors, and finally at the end here, do you have any questions for me? I know we're sort of at time now. I sort of, thank you, Angela. I appreciate the applause. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts? I would love to hear what you guys are doing in your organization, and feel free to, I don't know if any of you are able to post comments, or I don't think anybody's allowed to. I'm not sure if anybody's allowed to unmute yourselves on these kind of calls, but I am curious, can everybody just give me a thumbs up if you think that any of this stuff is something that if you got at least an idea of what you could do in your organization? Would you give me a thumbs up? Thank you, Angela. Anyone else? All right. Well, I know we're getting on the dinner hour. I think half of you are probably, eating your noodles while you're watching this. But thank you again. I appreciate your time. Thank you for letting me present. It's been a pleasure. And have a good rest of your day or evening, or tomorrow, depending on what time zone you're in.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Much appreciated. It was great.
All right. Thank you. I will say real quick, I've got 2 people. Have you tried Power Apps tables? Yes, you could use tables, and I use SharePoint because I wanted a lightweight data source, but you could certainly use the Dataverse if you wanted a more robust data model. So SharePoint was just sort of an easy, quick and dirty thing, but absolutely you could use a different data source. And then you have Bernice said, I'm in a small org, and so I have to do several of the processes myself through remote IT. So again, I hope I can show you that it's a lot of different pieces, but not any one of the pieces is really huge, and so this is where I thought, even if you're like, well, we have our own form, but maybe we could use Power Automate to create the user accounts. Again, my hope is that even if you aren't going to implement this whole system, maybe you can take a nugget out of there and say, well, that's one way we could handle this one piece of the process. So Bernice, I hope that it's able to make your process a smidge easier since you're working remotely. All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate your time. Am I the last session of the day?
No, we have one more.
One more. Okay. All right.
Trying
Well,
to balance East Coast and West Coast, so we started
yeah,
late.
it's okay. You know what? I'm in the central time zone, so it's I think 6 o'clock here. So anyhow, one more at the end of the day. So best wishes, everyone. Thank you again.
Okay, thanks for
All
being
right.
here.